All right, so we're recording. Here we go. So last week we introduced this concept of the Kabbalah of the Hebrew alphabet. This idea that each. Oh, Beth, you were not here last week. All right, so we'll quickly get you in. We can't hear you. Your sound doesn't seem like it's off, but yet we can't hear you. All right, well, you'll figure that out and then we'll hear from you. Okay, so um, so last week we introduced this idea of the Kabbalah of the Hebrew alphabet and looking at the letters of the Hebrew alphabet not just as mechanisms to form words, which then form sentences, which then form ideas, but that the letters themselves tell a story, that each one of the letters represents a certain divine energy, a certain aspect of God's revelation into this world. And really, we can study the alphabet itself to understand the building blocks, the mechanisms behind the Torah, the mechanisms behind the stories, the story behind the story, the DNA, if you will, of creation. All of that is contained in the alphabet, so we can study it almost as the same way one would study a text, analyzing a text. We can study the alphabet as a text. So I'm sharing my screen with you here. We saw last week, and I hope that you've downloaded this, but you can see it on my screen, that if we take a look at the very first four letters of the Hebrew alphabet, we already see a pattern taking shape. The alphabet begins with the letter Aleph, which has the numerical value of 1. And really the only thing that exists that can be described with the letter 1, That's the way we talk in the Hebrew alphabet. With the number 1, with the letter Aleph. The only thing that is truly 1 is God. Because everything else is part of this duality. Yes, there is one Shlomo Buxbaum, but yet I experience myself in many different colors. I experience the duality that exists within me. I experience hot and cold, good and evil, yes and no, right and wrong, happy and sad. Right? I am a blend of all of these different dualities. So yes, is there one Shlomo Buxbaum? Of course, but that's not the way I am part of and I am just part of a much bigger system. So therefore, one cannot really say that oneness describes us. But yet when it comes to God, God is everything. God is everything and everywhere. Everything exists within God. So therefore, the only true oneness is God. So that's the letter Aleph. And we said that the word Aleph, the actual word Aleph, means, number one, the Aluf means a master. So, and if you look at the way the Aleph looks, it's almost like prominent. It's like standing there with two legs, like standing on top of the world. It's Aluf, it's the master. It's the we'll take a look here at the chart. The different meanings of it. It's the teacher. Like people go and you make aliyah, you go to Opan, right? So the Aleph is the teacher, it's the master, it's the absolute oneness. And because of that, we said that we experience everything that comes from God. God is Ein Sof. God has no end. So the Ein Sof, the word Ein Sof begins with an Aleph. And we experience the Or, the energy, the light of God. The Or Ein Sof, the word Or, light, also begins with an Aleph. So Aleph, as it stands in the beginning of the alphabet, that is the representation of God, which really precedes all of creation. And we said last week that all the physical world as we experience it, not just the physical world, but everything that is outside of God is captured in the next three letters: the bet, the gimel, and the dalid. Beged. Beged means an article of clothing, and like we said many times, everything that we experience in existence is all the beged, is all the clothing of God. And the same way we wear clothing to both reveal and to conceal, the same way when we look around at the existence that we're placed in, it's concealing God, But if we pay closer attention, it's also revealing God. So the beginning of the alphabet is Aleph, Beged. It's the Or Ein Sof, the light of godliness that is concealed in the Beged. That is where we are standing right now. Any questions on this before we go a little bit deeper into this idea? Any questions? Yeah, Andy.
Because I listened to the video last week. I just want to make sense of this. If Aleph is at the beginning of the word, is used at the beginning of a word, like Adam or Aleinu or Abraham, it's only at the beginning of the word that it has that meaning. If it's in the middle of the word or at the end of the word, does it
No,
have that same?
well, no, but if it's in the beginning of the word, it's certainly going to be more. Its role is going to be much more prominent. So you will certainly find in throughout, and we're going to see it with some other letters, although in this series we won't see it as much. But you definitely will find throughout Kabbalah that they will understand the word not only by its first letter, but by all of the letters that are contained in it.
That's what I was going to
Yeah,
ask.
so every letter is an ingredient. But when there are certain words that the first letter of it is, if you look at the first letter is certainly going to reflect, the word is going to reflect what the letter stands for, if it's the first letter in the word. Okay? Sometimes we'll see it at the end of a word where it will make a difference in it. But definitely when we're trying to understand the letters, we'll first look for the most prominent words that begin with this letter. Any other questions? Okay, so let's try to understand, before we move on, let's try to look at this beged. Let's look at this article of clothing. And let's just try to understand how these letters, the bet, the gimel, and the dalet, that form the word beged, how they show God's or Ein Sof, God's the energy of God's ineffability being manifested in creation, how we see, why these letters, what can these letters tell us about how that story unfolds within creation. So if you take a look at the letter bet for a second, and again, I know this is difficult, complicated, and ask at any time. The letter bet, the word bays or bet, means bias. It means a house. Right? The word bayit means house. And therefore, it's such an appropriate second letter because everything that we're trying to do, the entire purpose of creation is to give a bias, to give a home, to provide a vessel, as Kabbalah calls it, right? A bias, a home for this Or Ein Sof, for this ineffable light of God. That's the purpose of it. So therefore, the second letter of the alphabet is Beis, is bias. And two represents this duality, that everything outside of God has duality in it. The only thing that is absolute consistent, the only thing that is one solid light is the Or Ein Sof, the light of God. Everything else, everything that we experience outside of God will always have duality, beginning with good and evil, male and female, right and wrong, right? Everything has this duality, Republican and Democrat. Everything has two ways, two sides, two ways to look at it. Because that's the way we build this home, like we've said in previous Kabbalah classes, right? God is innately perfect. We're not innately perfect. The way we become godly is by navigating through that duality. It's by making choices. It's only because we have the ability to make a choice that we can become godly. If God just gave us one path, then we can never be godly. Then therefore we are the opposite of God, because God is telling us what to do. This is the life that you're going to have to lead, and you're just going to have to lead it. I'm the boss, and you're the horse. But the fact that God puts us in a world of duality, in a world of choice, now we are able to emulate God. The word for choice, what is the Hebrew word for choice? Free will, what is the Hebrew word? Bechira, starts with a bet. The Torah begins, the very first letter of the Torah is Bereshit, beginning with a bet. Because the entire story of the Torah is, how do we create this bayit? How do we create this home for God? And how do we do that? Through the choices, through the different choices. That's why if you look at the letter bet, it's a line at the top and it's a line on the bottom, two different paths. Always a matter of choice. And if you take a look at the bet is almost like, it's almost like an open, if you're reading from right to left as Hebrew goes, it's almost like an open parentheses, like the beginning of a journey. Look at my mouse, the way it's on the screen over here, right? This is the starting line. This is where everything begins. You can't go past this line. Before this line, we can't understand it. That's the Or Ein Sof. That's the God that we cannot possibly fathom. But from here on, it's an open book. Ladies and gentlemen, the door is wide open. Now it's time for you to go out into the world. Now it's time for creation to begin to formulate itself. It's an open door. Look at the bottom over here. It's got a little arrow pointing back, just saying like, oh, this is not really the beginning. There's a beginning before this beginning. There's an Aleph, but you can't understand the Aleph. The Aleph is beyond our understanding. The Aleph is the realm of God's light, the Or Ein Sof. But now we're ready to begin the journey. We're ready to begin the journey of building a bayit, building a home for God. The Aleph is the Av and the Aim, the parent. The Bet is the Ben or the Bat, the child. So Bet is the first letter in this beged, in this garment. I know that I keep on throwing out Hebrew words, and I hope that I'm not losing them. I'm trying to do my best to translate whenever I say something in Hebrew. But again, since it is the Hebrew alphabet, I do want to show you how the letter Bet plays that role. So in this word beged, in understanding the world as a garment of God, the very first letter is the bet, which is the bias, which is the home. It is bria, it's creation. It's bereshit, it's the beginning. It's bris, it's a covenant. It's bechira, it's choice. It's numerical value 2, because everything outside of God is going to be about making those choices. That's what's represented by the letter bet. Now, if you remember going back, and especially those of you who have learned with us for a long time. So do you remember when we were at the JCC? So I shared with you that in one of the main foundational principles of Kabbalah is that there are 4 spiritual universes, 4 spiritual worlds that separate us from God. Do you remember learning about that at the JCC?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We even gave them names. There was the Olam Ha'atzilut, which is the place that's closest to God, the universe that's closest to God. The next one is the Olam HaBriya. Then there's Olam HaYetzira. And then there's Olam HaAsiya. Again, Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. These are the 4 supernal worlds, the 4 spiritual universes, each one acting as a filter between us and God, so that God's light will not overpower us. We are members. Well, that's actually a difficult thing. I was about to misspeak. We are really members of every single universe, but our consciousness resides in the Olam HaAsiya, in the lowest universe. Our physical consciousness, our awareness of ourselves as bodies, as human beings, that resides in the Olam HaAsiya. On a soul level, we're plugged in everywhere. Right? We have a part of our soul that's connected to Yetzirah, right? Connected to Bria, connected to Atzilut. That's why through our actions and our words and our thoughts, we're able to affect all of the supernal realms, all of these universes. But at least on a conscious level, we exist here in Asiya. But there are those sort of 4 worlds, those 4 filters that separate us from God. That plays a major role throughout Kabbalah, throughout Judaism itself. So because of that, one will see that when we look at the Aleph Bet, the first 4 letters of the alphabet will correspond to these 4 worlds. And because of that, we have Aleph, which Aleph is really the highest place you can go, the first level existing in the first world, the first level of filter, and then to the Bet, and then to the Gimel, and then to the Dalet. And when we get to the Dalet, when we get to the fourth, we're going to see that the Dalet itself, right, being, I'll just show you how it looks over here. The Dalet being a vertical line and a horizontal line, almost like two arrows pointing in the different directions, because the Dalet for us provides us a physical space to exist in. And the Olam HaAsiya is the world of physicality, the world of space, the world where I bang on the table and it makes a noise. The world where people can touch each other, a physical world of existence. That's represented by the Dalet. But in between this Bet and Dalet, there is this Gimel. Now I want you to take a close look here at this Gimel and use your imagination for a moment. Because again, one of the things that we want to look at when we're looking at the letters is we want to look at the shapes of the letters. So take a good look at the shape of the letter for a moment. And tell me, use your imagination, be creative, okay? Put on your artist's glasses for a second. And you look at this Gimel, right? You know, sometimes you go to like an art gallery and you see all these abstract paintings, and you see people are like, standing there looking at it, and they're like, I see a fish and two lovers, and like looks to me like my kid spilled some paint on a canvas. So like you have to when you look at these letters, you have to look deeply. So what do you see when you look at the letter Gimel? What do you see?
It almost looks like a person walking.
It does, right? Actually, it does. It looks like a person walking. Looks like a person walking forward. Now let's take a look for a moment. Keep that in mind. Keep in mind that the letter Gimel looks like a person walking forward. Now let's take a look at the meaning of the word Gimel. So on the one hand, it means to nourish, to give a gift to someone, like we say, Gomel chasadim tovim, gimilat chesed. So to be Gomel is to give something, to give a gift, to nourish, to take care of something. In the Torah, we find that Gomel means to wean. When I wean a child off of nursing from his mother, so it says you're Gomel that child. So it means to nourish, it means to wean, which is interesting to think about the connection there. But then it also means a camel. So let's try to understand, what do these three words have in common? To nourish, to wean, and camel. What's the commonality between these three words? Yeah, Andy.
To me, it looks like establishing independence from the beginning. You nourish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Beautiful. Right? Because if you think about a camel, what is a camel? A camel is the most independent animal. You rent a camel if you're going in the desert for several days. A camel represents independence. Weaning is making a child independent. And to nourish someone, the greatest gift you can give to someone is any gift that keeps on giving. I can give you tzedakah, or I can give you a job. A greater gift is to give you a job, because it gives you the ability to make your own money, that you're not dependent on me. Right? So the greatest gift is a gift that creates independence. Okay, so the various definitions of the word Gimel all reflect this idea that Gimel is creating independence. Now, listen. Let's try to visualize something else for a moment, and this is really going to bring together this connection between the Aleph and the Bet and the Gimel and the Daled. Let's visualize for a moment a woman who's about to give birth to a child. Because again, obviously what's happening over here is the Aleph Bet is telling us a story of God, so to speak, birthing the world. So if you think, you have this woman, and she is an individual. She is one person. But then she becomes pregnant with a child. So now she has a second human being contained inside of her. Is she now one person, or is she two people? It's actually a very controversial question today, right? In politics, it's a very controversial question. And in the Torah, it's an extremely controversial question. In fact, there's many discussions how we treat a fetus within the mother's womb. It doesn't only apply to the laws of abortion, it applies to laws of conversion, it applies to laws of parenthood. How do we view this entity of a pregnant mother? Because in a way, you could say, well, they're two people because there's two souls connected here, but yet they're completely attached. There is no differentiation. One cannot exist without the other. So it's almost a quasi second. So the beginning of every birthing process begins with the new entity still contained within the original source. Think about planting a seed in the ground. By the time you see a tree growing, by the time you see a plant, what has already happened under the surface? It has already taken root. I don't know the language behind it, but something happens to the seed where it decays in the ground, and then from there it turns into a root. So there's already work happening beneath the surface where you can't even see it. So on the level of bet, if one could experience the Olam Habriya, this highest place, well, under Atzilut, right, the second level, the second world, the Olam Habriya. So does existence exist as something separate, or as something that at least feels separate from God? Yes, but it's beneath the surface. It's like a fetus in the womb of its mother. It's like a seed taking root underground. It has separateness, but yet it's still within the realm of its creator. The next aspect of it, the next process, is slowly, the fetus is going to grow, it's going to mature, it's going to develop. And then the mother is going to give birth to the child. But even at that moment, even at the moment of birth, it's still attached, right, by the umbilical cord. And then you cut the umbilical cord, but the child is still dependent. And slowly, so there's this transition period when you would say, are these two human beings? Oh, you better believe they are. But yet, second human being is still completely dependent on human being A. And then finally, it develops independence. Or, going to our example of something that's growing. Even once the seed emerges and comes through the ground, it will grow first its stem, and then the flower will bloom. So you'll look at the stem or the trunk of the tree, you'll look at that as the point that's connecting the two, and then you'll have the leaves or the fruit or the flower, and you'll say that's independence. So all of creation always goes through these four phases where number one, it's still completely in the realm of the creator. The second is it's separate, but it's unrecognizable as separate. The third is it's becoming independent. And the fourth is that it feels completely separate. Now, we are never fully separate from God. That is an illusion that God allows us to feel separate from God, to feel independent, because that's how we become closer to God. So even though we're going to speak about becoming independent from God, we're only speaking metaphorically. Because really, if we really had the glasses to see God, we would realize it's all an illusion and we're still completely consumed in God. We're still being cradled in God like a fetus within a mother. But yet God allows us to be weaned off of feeling that so that we could exist in a realm feeling independent. And now, with that, we can understand the beged. We can understand every single step of the beged, of the garment of our existence. Right? On the level of bet, we were a bias. We were already experiencing some sort of separation, but we're still like a fetus in the mother's womb. On that level, in the Olam Habriya, the world is separate in some way, but it's still completely consumed. When we get to the Gimel now already speaks about the next world. It already speaks about this Gomel. And that's why I asked you how it looks, and you said it looks like a person who's the person who's walking, right? Because it's already showing the beginning of independence. It already shows the world. And again, I'm just going to say it again. I'm not going to keep on saying it, but let me just say it one more time. Right? We're all speaking within the metaphor. Within the metaphor of the world becoming independent from God, because that's the way God wants us to see ourselves. So we're on the go with a gimel, right? That's good. It actually works well. We're on the go. We're weaning ourselves off. We're starting to feel a certain sense of being independent, but still, right? We're in the weaning process, but we haven't fully gotten there. Now we get to the Dalit. We get to this lowest filter, the Olam Ha'asiyah. The Dalit is a horizontal line and a vertical line, showing all the different directions. Now we're finally in this space that we are now completely independent from God. If you take a look at many of the things that are represented by the numerical value 4, that is represented by the Dalit, so we see that the world, we look at the world of 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. So we already see the idea of space developing, right, within the Dalit. There's 4 different expansions from that midpoint. And like I said, we speak about 4 spiritual worlds. There's also 4 different elements, 4 different states of matter. There's 4 different aspects of our own personalities. We won't get into that right now. But something in Judaism that's probably more recognizable in Passover is the 4 cups of wine that correspond to the 4 different exiles. We spoke about this before Pesach. The 4 sons, the 4 children, the wise son, the evil son, the simple son, and the son that doesn't know how to ask. And perhaps over there, that's the most beautiful example of 4 taking effect. Why? Because there are a lot more than 4 sons. Okay, I have 6 children, and they're all different. I speak to them all differently. And if you have 10 Jews in a room, they're all so. You can't categorize people and put them into 4 boxes. So when we say that there's 4 sons at the Pesach Seder, 4 children at the Pesach Seder, doesn't mean 4. It can mean a bazillion and 4. 4 is just the number that says variation. 4 is just a number that says variety. 4 means that now there's a place of expansion, there's a place of independence, there's a place of free thinking. That's what happens at the level of 4. So 4, again, represents sort of this space. It's the last level in the Beged. And I just want to point out something over here, that the meaning of the letter Dalid, of the word Dalid, which is the name of the letter, so it means Delet, it means a doorway, which is certainly a sign of independence, right? Your child is now mature. See you later, mom and dad. I'm going out into the world. But it also comes from the word Dal, which means a poor person. Why? Because in the beginning of our independence, if you think about it, let's go back to our story about the child who's becoming independent. Right, so again, it went through the phase of being a fetus, of being completely one with its mother. It went through the weaning phase. Now it's ready to become independent. But where is it starting from? Where does the 17-year-old start from when they leave college? They're independent, but they're starting from the beginning. They've got nothing. It's now their time to build. They're starting from scratch. So on the one hand, it's very exciting to be weaned off from your parents. I have my own bank account today. Yeah, but your bank account is empty. Yeah, but it's my own bank account. I feel great. So on the one hand, it's independent, but on the other hand, it's empty. So over here, when the world weans itself off, so to speak, when the world finally does gain its independence, and now us as human beings, we're now placed here on this planet with a mission. We are the Dal. Our bank account is empty. And now the journey forward in the Aleph Bet is going to be that journey of filling that bank account, of going from being completely independent, which sounds like a lot of fun, but very, very frightening, to now growing and developing more and more and more and really trying to become our own human being. That's what's going to happen from the Dalet and on. But I want you to take a very close look at the Dalet, and then I'll stop, and if you have any questions, you could ask. But take a close look at the Dalet. You have the vertical line, you have the horizontal line, but you also have that little thing over there. You see that little thing pointing backwards, right? Pointing back to the right? Where is it pointing back to? It's pointing back to the Gimel. Take a look here. You got the little Dalet. It's got a lot of independence. It's looking forward, but it's pointing back. Because you know, and again, some of you have older children, you know, right? They're out, they're in college, they're young professionals, they're starting, but gotta just make sure we're still keeping in touch with mom and dad, because we are still poor and we still are gonna need their support. So even as we begin this journey of independence in this lifetime, to try to feel independent from God, to try to get back to godliness on our own, we're still looking back. We're still looking backwards. We're still making sure we're not forgetting our source. So that's the nature of the Beged. So the Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled lead us. They're the pregame. They're what leads us to this point. When you enter this world feeling independent, you are now in the world of Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled. The world of the four filters, filtering itself away from God so that we can feel independent. We're now in the Beged. We're at the outermost point, feeling like we're now our own entities, and now we're ready to move forward in our journey. I just want to make sure all of this is very clear to me, but I want to make sure that it's clear to you. So let's just pause for a moment, take a breath, and if anyone has any questions or wants me to clarify any of these points, let me know. Yeah. Adrian, I see your lips moving, but you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the Dalet looking back at Aleph too?
Exactly. It's trying to look back as far, I mean, it can only look back as far as it can comprehend. But it's looking back at all of those things. It's looking back at the Gimel, which is coming from the Bet, which ultimately, remember, the Bet itself is pointing back.
Okay.
So it's coming straight through. Everything is always looking back to the Aleph. Yeah. Andy.
Back to kind of what I was saying in the beginning about the Aleph. If a bet, or I mean, if a Gimel is in the middle of the word, does that mean that the word itself will have meaning of like sending off or going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if Dalet is at the end of the word, does that have any symbolism?
So again, it always does, but it's always harder to tell. So like in certain words, so for example, in the word David, where you have a dalet at the end, you will see commentaries comment on it. So very, very often you will see commentaries commentaries will look at the entire word and actually break down the word. So for example, I'll give you an example. Again, it's hard for me to give you this example because it has to do with the letter we haven't learned yet. But the word for one is echad. So there's many commentaries that speak about echad being an aleph and a ches and a dalet. Now we haven't learned the chet yet. We haven't learned it yet. So let's just not talk about that right now. But if you take a look at the aleph in the beginning is the oneness of God. The dalet is what we just learned is the space in which we want to receive God, the space that allows us in the physical world to receive God. So when we're talking about echad, God is one, we're saying that the aleph of oneness permeates the daled, permeates the four corners of the world. Right? So that's the word echad. So yes, we want to take words for every letter that's contained in that word, and often it's more obvious than others. Okay, shall we move on? Good. So hopefully all of this is clear. And again, obviously, think about it more. Think about it even after the class. Try to tell these things over to people. And sometimes when you're telling it over, that will help you clarify what makes sense and what you still need to ask on. But if we take a look now, once we understand the nature of the beged, something absolutely wonderful is about to happen. Because as the Aleph Bet unfolds, and as the story of creation unfolds, we're going to see that really, at least, I mean, it's true throughout the alphabet, but we're going to see it especially in the first 10 letters of the alphabet. We're going to see the story, a story unfold. And the story that's going to unfold is really the story of the divine presence that we call the Shekhinah. Shekhinah means the divine presence, the aspect of God, the presence of God in this physical world. We're going to see between the Aleph and the Yud, which is numerical value 10, we're going to see how the divine presence is looking to find a home in this world. It's looking to become known, to become recognized. Because at this point where we are in Dalid, what we've now experienced is a concealment of God, which is really a very, very sad thing. It's sad that God is concealed. But God has to be concealed because that's what will allow us to bring God into this world. So the story of God, or the story of God's presence, the Shekhinah, is really a story of like what's referred to in many of the Kabbalistic texts as a princess that disappears until she's found again. Because when we come into this world at the level of the Daled, when we enter into this world, it's wonderful to have independence, but our bank account is empty because we have not yet found God. That's why it's the Dal. That's why it's poor. Now, if you take a look over here at this quote from the Talmud, this is what the Talmud says in Tractate Menachot. It says the letters Yud, that's this one, numerical value 10, and the letter Hey, that's the one that we're about to learn, that constitute the word Yah, Yud and Hey, which is the name of God. They're referring to the two worlds that the Holy One, blessed be He, created. One with the letter Hey, that's this one, and one with the letter Yud, that's this one. This is a very, very important piece of Talmud because what the Talmud is telling us is that God created the world with the letter Hey. Now, 2 weeks ago, or before last class, less than 2 weeks ago, that might not have made that much sense. Well, God created the world with the letter Hey. Why specifically the letter Hey? Right? There's 4 letters before it. Why not Aleph? Why not Bet? Why not Gimel? Why not Dalet? Well, now we can understand what does the Talmud mean? Why the letter Hey? Because it's only at this point now that we can start talking about the journey. The Aleph and the Bet and the Gimel and the Dalet, that was all the birthing process. That's all what got to us to the Hey, that got us to now this place, this journey that will begin with the letter Hey. But everything up until now was just the process of getting here. Now we're ready to begin our journey, and that journey begins at the letter Hey. Now take a close look at the letter Hey, and yes.
Is Hey the only letter that's not connected?
That is a wonderful question, and we'll talk about that. I believe that, well, you have the mem at the bottom.
But
You
it's
have some that have an opening at the bottom.
Yeah, it's the only separate letter.
Exactly.
Does that
Exactly.
mean something?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about exactly why it's shaped that way. But the first thing that you'll notice about the shape in context, what do you notice about the shape of the Hey? And again, that is a wonderful thing, and Andy, you're already on to where we're going here. But what do you notice about the Hey, not as an independent letter, but in context of the letter both before it and the letter after it? What do you notice about the Hey?
It has the letter Dalet in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it almost jumps out at you that really Hey is the letter Dalet with an addition. Now, what is that addition? Now, again, in this specific context, the Hey could be written in 2 different ways. In this one, this line happens to be very long. In the Torah, it would not look like that. In the Torah, let me actually see if I can pull up the little marker over here. In the Torah, it would look a little bit more like this, with this line being a little bit shorter. So now you noticed over here, this part, that it's that this part is exactly identical to the letter Dalid. But there's another piece, and that is this little piece down over here. Now again, you can't see it over here because it's very long, but imagine it's shorter. What does this look like? It looks, we didn't learn it yet, but it looks like this letter here, it looks like the letter Yud. So it's as if somebody took this letter Dalid, it's as if we took this letter, right? God took this letter Dalid, took this letter Yud, which we haven't learned about yet, and put them together. It's almost as if God took this letter Yud and hid it right over here in the letter Dalid, just like this. Let's think how fascinating and how profound that is. Because what did we just say in the Talmud Menachot? We just said that Yud represents the next world, the spiritual realm. Yud is going to be, as we're going to see when we get there, Yud is the letter of pure spirituality. It's just a dot, it's just a point. It's where we're looking towards at the end of our journey to get to the Yud, to get to that world. But we don't have to wait till we get there. We can see it right over here in the hay. What is this world? This world is compared to this combination between a Dalid, which is just vacant, empty space. Like we said, Dalid is the empty bank account that you just opened up. It's so beautiful because it's, my fresh bank account, but it's so sad and empty. That's the Dalid. But there's something hidden in the Dalid, and that is a Yud. That is spirituality. You know, the letter Hey, we're going to see over here, the letter Hey stands for Horayon, pregnancy. I mean, pregnancy, like we said, is something contained within something. The Hey is a Dalid, is a physical space that has the hidden dot of God in there, hidden spirituality. And the whole journey from the Hey and onwards, the whole journey is all about getting to the Yud. It's about discovering the hidden spirituality that's within the physical world. That's why we say that the world is compared to a hay, because the hay itself, that is what the hay is. The hay is the Dalid, the physical space, with the Yud that is hidden inside of it. Do you see that? Do you feel that? A fascinating, fascinating idea. So if we take a look now back at the letter Hey, the chart of the letter Hey, what do we see about the letter Hey? Number one, the word Hey means here. Now notice when I said here, I stuck out my hand, like I'm giving you something. And if you take a look at my hand, you'll see there's 5 fingers on a hand. Because Hey is numerical value 5. That's why we're created with 5 fingers on our hand, because our hand represents physical space, because I could create this physical space with my hand. But what is my hand here? What is my hand meant for? Why did God give us hands? God gave us hands to both give and to receive. I have a hand because there's something that's supposed to be in my hand. The gift that I'm giving to you. The fact that we could hold hands and become one. Right? So therefore, this world, when we say this world is like a hay, this world is like God's hand reaching out to us and saying, here you go. I'm giving you this realm. I'm giving you this realm, but there's something inside of it. That's the little dot inside. Here's my here's my gift to you. A physical world where you could access, where you can find me in this world. That's why there's 5 books of the Torah specifically, because the 5 books of the Torah is the blueprint to teach us how to make sense out of this physical space and to find God in this physical space. And you pointed out there's this little gap between the top and the bottom. And now, first of all, the first thing you see is the reason behind that is because it's meant to identifiably be a Dalet on the outside and a Yud on the inside. But furthermore, the Talmud says something beautiful. It says the physical world is compared to a hay because the physical world is shaky ground. You're walking on air. It's so easy to make a mistake. It's so easy to fall. It's so easy to stumble. But yet, there's always an opening. There's always a way back in. And when a person falls through the bottom, falls through here, But this says, I want to find God again. I want to come home. I want to come back. You don't go back through the bottom. That's what the Talmud says. You don't go back through here. You come around the top. The Talmud says that a person who finds God on their own, a person who falls and has to recover from that fall, you fail and you try again. You never go back through the bottom. You always go through the top. That's why very often you see that very often people who were not raised with Torah observance, but came to it later on, often these people become really much more spiritually connected, much more spiritually in tune than those that grew up with it. Because when you've fallen through, or even more than that, someone who grew up with it and left, and then on their own, right, they left, they said, I don't want a part of this. And then they say, I want to come back home. Often those people are from the strongest, the most spiritually in tune. Because when you fall through the bottom, you can't come back in through the bottom. You come back in through the top. You come straight home to your spiritual home. So that's the idea behind the hay. And as we're going to see next week, sharing my screen again here, as we're going to see next week, the hay is going to lead straight into the vav. But what is the vav? What is that? The vav also looks a lot like the yud, except with a much longer line. So the vav is going to really take the little yud, the little hidden spiritual point within the hay, and it's going to say, let's grow that. Let's bring that out into the open. Let's take the hidden spirituality, God who's hiding everywhere. Let's take that. Let's take that little yud, the pintala yud, that little point of holiness that's hidden in creation, and let's bring it down. Let's bring it out. Vav is going to be a letter of connection, connecting the hidden point, connecting us with this hidden point, this hidden yud that's in creation. So we see again the story unfolding. The story from Aleph through Yud is the story of creation and the story of uncovering the hidden spirituality that's in everything. All right, everybody. That's today's class. I hope this made sense. This is very deep. Think about it, tell it over to others, and come back and ask me any questions that you have. And if you're confused, I'm happy to share with you the recording. And if you want to watch the class again, or if you missed something, make sure you get it, because this is just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Torah that will really, since I've started really going into depth to prepare for this class, I've learned it in the past, but now I'm really trying to go in depth. Every single time I open up the siddur, it's just like, it's just a whole new experience. It's literally like I'm just seeing the letters like jump off the page. It's fantastic. So I hope that you're finding this meaningful. And again, stay tuned. Look at your emails and try to clear the space. If you can come on Monday night, 8:30 p.m. for a special class going deeper into the Shabbos traditions, I think you'll enjoy that as well. All right?
Thank you.
Wishing you all a wonderful day.
Thank you.